Now, one of the first things I started reading about, before I started getting into Africa and ancient Africa, I started looking at the accomplishments of African Americans, stuff that we did here in America. And, it's amazing about, what we don't know. A lot of history that African Americans, contributed to the advancement of America and to the creation of America and to the sovereignty of Americans. We play a lot of prominent roles, a lot of pivotal roles in, the Revolutionary War and much of the infancy of America and the whole war between us and King George III. Now, Glenn Beck, and I got to give him credit for this. I'm not a big Glenn Beck fan, but, I gave him a lot of respect for doing this show. Now, Glenn Beck he did a whole show on, Black founding fathers, where he talked about the contributions that African Americans made to America and to, making America free. Take a look at this.
There is a hunger in America for the truth, and tonight, I think we're going to blow your mind. You're going to have to ask yourself a couple of questions by the end of the program. Why would our schools leave all of this history out? I mean, this is some of the greatest American story that you've ever heard. Why would they do that? And it's everywhere. You just don't know where to look. If you take a look at the revolutionary paintings of revolutionary times, here it is. It's the Boston Tea Party. Bunch of white guys, and then these people strangely looking like Indians, and they're not. But that's it. Not a lot of racial diversity. If you watch movies, one great movie. This is John Adams. You watch John Adams, and you don't see a lot of racial diversity. I'm currently watching Johnny Tremaine. This is. I love this movie. I remember this growing up. I was watching it with my kids just last night, and I noticed there are a couple of American Indians, but you don't see any African Americans unless they're slaves. They will show people as slaves, but that's it. Now, I want to show you a painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Here's the Battle of Bunker Hill. Bunch of white guys, right? Unless you know where to look. Right here. That's Peter Salem. He was actually the hero of the battle. It doesn't look like he's a hero there. He looks like he's cowering behind the white guy with a sword. He was the hero of the battle. And he saved scores of American lives that day. Why don't we know this? Look at the picture of the Battle of Lexington. 150 Americans. There it is. Do you see any faces of color in this painting? They were all members of the Reverend Jonas Clark's church. They went out. They were actually, if I'm not mistaken, David, they were in church at the time, right?
He called them together at church,
okay,
yes.
So we called together for church and then said, let's go! And they went to defend their town. When the shot heard around the world was over that day, there were 18 Americans lying on the ground. What you don't see in this painting are the equal numbers of whites and blacks. They were white and black patriots. It was a mixed church. Did you even know that happened? One of those injured patriots on the ground in this painting was a black man named Prince Estabrook. I bet you never heard of Prince Estabrook before. How about the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware? Bunch of white guys, right? No. Look here. African American, helping row the boat across. You know what his name was? Prince Whipple. He fought alongside Washington during the Revolution. Take a look at this one. This painting of, this is the Marquis de Lafayette. If you look at this, you just think, oh yeah, and then he made his slave dress up like I don't know what. But that's what you would think, right? This guy is incredibly important. This guy may have won the Revolutionary War. James Armistead was his name. How did he win the Revolutionary War? Double spy. I'm going to let David tell the story here in a minute, but basically the Brits thought that he was spying for them, but he was spying for General Washington. He'd give the Brits bad intel and reveal the good critical information to General Washington. Did you know this story? Why? I'm so tired of people saying, well, it was just the white people, white people, white people. No. No. Why are we intentionally leaving others out?
James Armistead.
Yeah, the spy.
It's a great one, because James Armistead, after the Battle of Richmond, he's in Virginia, and a lot of the battles do not happen in Virginia. But after the siege of Richmond, he's there, he sees what the British have done in his home state, and he goes to enlist. He said, I want to help. And he really, I don't know why, but he liked Lafayette. He went to Lafayette, young French general, 19 years old, said, I want to fight with you. And so they make this agreement, and what happens is James Armistead goes over to Benedict Arnold's camp, his British general then, traitor British general, and he says, oh, these mean Americans, they mistreat me. I've escaped as a slave. Please let me stay with you. And Arnold says, okay, you can wait on us. And so he is part of Benedict Arnold's staff, waiting on Benedict Arnold. And Arnold's one of the generals, which means he meets with all the other generals. So he's meeting with Cornwallis all the time. And so James Armistead is just serving them and doing all the right stuff and just picking up intelligence like crazy. Every day he gets back with Lafayette, says, here's what they're doing, here's where they're going, here's what they're going to do next. And kept feeding the information back. And Cornwallis in this time got really comfortable with James and said, you know, I don't want to ask you to do something you don't want to do, but would you consider being a spy against your former guys there, the Americans? Would you be a British spy and tell us what they're doing? He said, yeah, I guess if you want me to, I will. You know, if you're going to force me to, I will. So he goes back.
It'd be tough getting across the lines, though, but I'll risk it for you.
I'll try it.
Right.
So he ends up saying, yeah, I'll do it. And what happens is when they leave Richmond, they decide that they're going down to Yorktown, and they're going to go down there. So what happens is Armistead's fed all that information to Washington and Lafayette. They're going to Yorktown. And he's let the British know that, oh, there's no Americans around down there. It's a real safe place to go. The Americans are elsewhere. So the British the British fleet drops the soldiers off in Yorktown, and the fleet takes off because there's no Americans around. Right then, the French fleet came in and blockaded the port, so the British couldn't get their ships back. And now we've got all the American troops waiting for them when he got up. They're pinned in on the peninsula. Can't go anywhere. So he probably cut months, maybe years off the revolution by what he did.
Why do we not know this story, because really, you talk to African Americans and they'll say, well, I mean, I think I had Al Sharpton say this to me. Well, you give me somebody like Rosa Parks up there. He said this about these three gentlemen.
Yeah.
Get rid of all the white guys. You give me somebody like Rosa Parks up there. Why don't you have any color there? And that's what prompted this show. There is. Why leave people like this out?
Let me give an example of how well we used to know this. You know, the painting you showed of Washington crossing the Delaware, this little jewel right here. You mentioned that this is Oliver Cromwell, and he is. But up here are Prince Whipple, but the other one's Oliver Cromwell. There's actually two blacks in the front of that boat, and they served not as slaves. They were free men who served with Washington on the general staff throughout the Revolution from start to finish. Now, this painting that you showed was done in 1851 by a German, and it was done in Europe. It wasn't done in America. It was done in Europe to show the Europeans, here's what the American Revolution looked like, which meant back then we knew blacks were involved, whites were involved. At the back of the boat, there's actually a lady dressed up in men's clothes. Yeah. This book right here is an old textbook from 1855. It's a great book. It's written by a black historian, a first black appointed federal office. It's called The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. Now, we studied that as a textbook. That is not a skinny little book that we have there. I mean, there's a lot of patriots in the American Revolution that we studied. Black patriots.
When did America have its first African-American judge? What year would you say? Anybody, take a guess. Tell me.
1768. Wentworth Cheswell, New Hampshire, elected to office in New Hampshire. He was reelected for the next 49 years, held 8 different political positions. Really cool story about him is we all know that Paul Revere made his midnight ride. We also know he wasn't the only guy riding that night. Another guy riding, Wentworth Cheswell, black and white riding.
Now, how is it possible? Did you know that we had an African-American ride to say the British are coming, the British are coming? Amy did. Amy did. Anybody else besides Amy know that? 2, 3. Okay, 3 people in the audience.
He was such a great guy, and we never hear about him because he rode north and Paul Revere rode west. And Revere was going after Reverend Jonas Clark's church because that's where Hancock and Adams were, was him. And that's where we had blacks and whites, as you pointed out, laying on the ground after that battle. Wentworth Cheswell rode north telling people the British are coming. And it was from the north that all those people came to Boston to take on the British at Bunker Hill and everywhere else. So we don't hear about his ride because the British went west, and that's where all the action happened. But it was a couple of days later when all these people started coming down from New Hampshire and Vermont and elsewhere, and that's where he had ridden, telling them what was up.
All right, David, explain quickly. Let's go through these people.
Let's go through these. This guy right here, this is Lemuel Haynes. Lemuel Haynes is a soldier in the American Revolution. He is a black preacher. He's the first black preacher ordained in America that was a pastor of a white congregation in Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, several places.
A black professor in
black
a
preacher,
white,
that's right, in a white church.
Yeah, black minister.
Black minister in a white church in 4 different states. He was ordained in the Congregationalist denomination in 1785. He's the first black to receive a master's degree in America. He got that in 1804 from Middlebury College. So Lemuel Haynes, every year on Washington's birthday, he preached a special sermon about George Washington, his commander-in-chief, in all of his churches where he was.
Unbelievable.
So we don't hear about Lemuel Haynes. This is Benjamin Banneker. I think he's the most brilliant scientist in American history. This guy,
wow.
Unbelievable what he did. He's the guy
more so than Franklin?
I would put Franklin and Banneker almost equal. Now, Franklin did a lot of inventions. This guy one time took a pocket watch. He taught himself how to read. He taught himself science. He wrote an almanac that 10 years ahead he was able to predict to the minute solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, 10 years before they happened. I mean, by watching the motion through a telescope, unbelievable what the guy did. He once took the back off a pocket watch, saw how it worked, went home and carved a wooden clock with all the gears, mainspring, and it was accurate to within 1 minute a year. A wooden clock the guy did.
Cow.
He's the guy who laid out Washington, D.C. He's the surveyor who did all that. He's a brilliant mathematician. Jefferson gave him...
Never knew this.
No. Jefferson gave him an example to France, said, hey, you guys in France think that blacks are inferior? Here's Benjamin Banneker.
Okay, I have
Jefferson
2 minutes total, so quickly
right
there, and then we have one
right
more.
here, James Armistead. We talked about the first double spy, really cool guy. This is Richard Allen. He's the first founder of a black denomination in America. He is a soldier in the American Revolution. He actually is the first guy to practice medicine, taught by sign of the Declaration, Dr. Benjamin Rush. Just a really cool story.
Okay.
So really cool.
All right, good. Now tell me.
Here to these guys.
Now let's take the full of the first representatives. I asked, when did we have our first black Speaker of the House? When did we have the first Speaker of the House? 1789. When did we have our first black Speaker of the House? I bet most people would say never.
Never, except it was right here. Joseph Hayne Rainey. Joseph Hayne Rainey of South Carolina is the first black to preside over the House of Representatives. These are the first 7 blacks elected to Congress. You have here Senator Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first black U.S. senator elected. He was a minister of the gospel. He was a missionary. He worked with Frederick Douglass. He recruited 3 regiments of black soldiers in the Civil War, and he was a missionary to slaves in the South. You have here Benjamin Turner, Josiah Wall, the large. This guy right here is really cool. Robert Brown Elliott is probably the most brilliant guy of that era. He actually took on the vice president of the Confederacy in a debate on the floor and just tore his head off. The racist Alexander Stephens. It was a great debate.
When did we turn? Were these guys proud Americans, or did they say
this is the epitome of what we were just talking about. These were individual guys. Half of these guys taught themselves to read. Half of these guys were slaves, and 5 years later they're sitting in Congress. And as slaves, it was a capital offense to learn to read. So these guys in 5 years, and I'll guarantee you read their speeches and records of Congress, you better have a dictionary and a thesaurus in both hands because you want to understand the language they use. It is so brilliant what these guys did.
But were they there to say the white man is bad and the America is bad?
No.
And
these guys were Richard Allen. Let me go back here. Richard Allen had been in slavery. Richard Allen was in slavery, and he held no bitterness at all. He says God would not allow bitterness even in Joseph when he was in prison. Do you think God will allow it in us? He said, we can't have bitterness. He said, by the way, there were some whites who held us in slavery, but it's whites who are working for our freedom. I mean, these guys had no bitterness. They wouldn't allow it.
Back in just a second.
So now, this is American history. I mean, not just African American history, but American history. History that directly affected, the progress of America. Events that took place in the infancy of America, the Revolutionary War we're talking about here, Civil War, and these things happened, and you have African Americans who played prominent roles in major events, major wars, and you know nothing about it. Didn't tell me this stuff in school. I didn't learn about any of these people in school except for Frederick Douglass. You know, never knew it was a black man that rode with Paul Revere, or a spy who was with Benedict Arnold who was spying on him, you know, that worked for the Marquis de Lafayette. Never knew about this stuff. Who knew? But, you know, this stuff was, as he said in the video, you know, it was printed in books in the 1800s, and now it's just, you know, gone. They don't teach us this stuff. And it's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video too, when you can see, you know, I was kind of trying to, you know, explain it in my last video, but you can see where once this country was taken over by, you know, the bankers, then our history went out the door. You know, everything changed. Once the school systems started to come into place, you know, black history went out the door. So you had a school system, you had people who knew about the accomplishments of African people. You had in the North, once slavery was, you know, abolished, and a lot of people don't realize this, that, you know, the Declaration of Independence included a passage in there that was basically condemning slavery. You know, Thomas Jefferson wrote a passage that was condemning slavery and was, you know, cussing out King George III, and they wanted to abolish slavery. But this passage was removed from the Declaration of Independence by, you know, I think it was Georgia and another state, and people who had money, who had an investment in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, removed this whole passage out of the Declaration of Independence, because they put in there that they wanted to abolish slavery. Now, a lot of people don't know that 1776, we talk about it, you know, 4th of July, the whole war happened and everything, and they was fighting for their freedom, fighting for their independence from King George III. So they did all of that. You know, why would you go through that and not free the slaves? But we know, of course, that the North said, you know, forget, you know, all this other stuff, and, you know, we still going to free people in the North. And we know that it was Vermont. When Vermont broke away from New York, Vermont was one of the first states to, you know, to basically write in their constitution the complete disbandment, the complete abolishment of slavery in Vermont. So they abolished slavery. We know Pennsylvania, they had basically put out there that they wanted a gradual decrease in slavery, you know, over the next few years. And we know about, I think it was 1804, that the North was completely free of slavery. But this is something that you need to understand about the history of America. Again, I always talk about this stuff because people need to know that, yeah, slavery, they wanted slavery to be abolished. You know, once they got from under the rule of King George, slavery was to go. Now, this is Britain we're talking about. Who gave you your Bible? You know, this was Britain. King James, again, gave it to these people, to black people, gave it to the people in America to say, hey, pound this into the slave's head. But here you have founding fathers who fought alongside of prominent African Americans who said, you know what, this ain't right. Because I know African Americans who contributed to our freedom, to the freedom of America. So we need to, not just that we're talking about wealthy African Americans, smart African Americans like Frederick Douglass, who was there, who contributed to, you know, America. You've seen that they had a whole Supreme Court judge system. We had senators, black judges. They were sitting there and they were serving with these black people, with African Americans who played pivotal roles in the success of America. So of course the North was like, you know, we got to abolish slavery. It's not right. And you need to understand that, because you got a lot of black people walking around with this pent up animosity about slavery, and they don't realize that, you know, you're talking about 13 colonies here. The 13 colonies did not control all of America. They didn't run the whole thing. So yeah, we get upset. We wanted slavery to be immediately abolished. You know, once the Revolutionary War was fought and it was won, you know, America declared its independence in 1776. And yeah, we was like, of course, y'all still enslaved black people. What's up with that? But you need to understand the history. These people, 13 colonies, did not control all of America. You still had Britain, who controlled states. You had France, who controlled much of America until the Louisiana Purchase, where, you know, $15 million basically bought the middle of America, you might as well say. Another thing that I have to say And a lot of people need to understand Mexico, they control a lot of territories in America. Almost the whole West Coast was Mexican territory until they had it basically taken away from them. Still, you need to understand, you had Spain controlling the South and Florida.